Similarly, the number of anti-Muslim groups in the U.S. has nearly tripled since 2015. I asked the White House if they also condemn that type of hatred. Sean Spicer indirectly replied that the president is focused on fighting radical extremism.
So, Margaret, President Trump has been pushed to comment about rising anti-Semitism before. Will this silence the critics? Although, as you pointed out, the Anne Frank House says probably not.
Well, this is the thing, is that it took until this point because the president didn't strongly reply last week on what would have, for many politicians, been a sort of standard answer of course, discrimination has no place in my administration. That would have been easy and put it to bed. He didn't do that. And because there were these accusations and intimations for months during his campaign, something that the campaign of the Trump administration did say they aren't embracing and that they denounce in terms of support coming from people associated with hate groups such as the KKK. This has held on to the administration now that they are at the White House. And so because there wasn't a strong and unequivocal statement given last week, and because that Holocaust Remembrance Day statement issued last month wasn't very clear and direct in recognizing that 6 million Jews were killed during the Holocaust, and that they were, while among other victims, that they were continuing to be targeted via anti-Semitism. That is something that drew strong condemnation among Israelis. So this is in many ways a boilerplate statement that most politicians would know to say. Because the president hasn't said it, it's stuck.
Margaret, in the past day or two, the White House has taken action that has been lauded by people on both sides of the aisle, with President Trump naming Lieutenant General McMaster as his new national security advisor and Vice President Pence trying to reassure our European allies over NATO. How are these moves being perceived?
Well, this is being well received among many European diplomats in terms of not only the vice president's comments overseas, but those by the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense along with him, and even the Homeland Security Chief, John Kelly. So that was notable for the U.S. not to have shown up at many of those key security conferences would have been a noticeable and worrisome departure. This naming of the new national security advisor, someone who is not only hailed McMaster as a battlefield commander, but also someone who's known as an intellectual, really raised a lot of praise from many across the board, across the aisle, and we will see whether his voice is as strong as some of the other political advisors within the Trump administration. The hope of many in the national security community is that it will be.
And Margaret, has there been any indication to you that after a rough first 4 weeks, the president is starting to stabilize his administration?
Well, with this naming of the national security advisor and other additions to the national security team, that is certainly what the indication would be, and the hope is that there continues to be follow through there. There are still a number of open positions at the State Department in terms of top aides to the Secretary of State. He still doesn't have a full team, and that isn't just because Congress hasn't moved. These nominations haven't even been sent up to the Hill for senators to consider. So there is some slow movement on that front, and some questions being asked about whether some of those agencies will be staffed in the same way they were previously, because President Trump has said things about slimming down the bureaucracy. And for people certainly over at the State Department, they're worried because they are already pretty thinly resourced, particularly when you consider how heavily resourced the Pentagon has been, even after having seen some budget cutbacks. So those concerns still persist, but there is certainly hope that President Trump, in making these key cabinet selections and this key national security advisor, is really putting a lot of experts in influential positions who will be able to take the reins and really fully help him make that transition from a campaign to an administration where they can focus on governing and dealing with so many of the incoming problems facing the president.
All right, Margaret Brennan at the White House. Margaret, thank you.